3 things that you need to know about evidence-based practice. What's up, everyone? It's Coach Tony with Bonvec Strength, and I'm going to talk about the term evidence-based practice, what it means, and why I think 99% of the coaches and athletes who say that they are evidence-based are full of shit. Now, evidence-based generally means that people base all of their training decisions and all of their coaching decisions on methods and things that have been proven in peer-reviewed research. So it shows up in some sort of research journal somewhere, so you can point to it and say that it's been studied and science shows that this is the right thing to do. Now, if you've ever lifted, competed, trained, coached in the real world, you understand that research moves slowly, way too slow for it to work in the real world and to check all your decisions against peer-reviewed research. There are so many decisions that go on a daily basis when I'm coaching my lifters, when I'm coaching my athletes, and I'm checking them against principles, not peer-reviewed research. Now, you've heard me say before that methods come and go, but the principles of exercise science, of strength training, of sports performance, those things don't change. Those things stay consistent. And I'm checking all of my training decisions and all of my coaching decisions against those principles, not peer-reviewed research. Much faster and much more applicable to a wide range of people. The thing about research is that a well-designed research study is tightly controlled. That means that they're accounting for all the things kind of outside of the thing that they're studying that may affect the results. So hopefully if it's a training study, if they're looking at some sort of training methodology, hopefully they're also controlling for things outside the gym, such as sleep, such as nutrition, recovery, stress levels, those things like that. And anybody who lifts or coaches in the real world knows that those things cannot be controlled. You cannot take control of all of your clients, of all of your lifters' lives to every little nitty-gritty detail to expect to see the same results that you would get with a study that's very, very tightly controlled. So something that we call that is the validity of a study, and that's how well the results of that study can be applied to the outside world, to populations and situations outside of the study itself. Now, there are 2 types of validity, one being internal validity, basically how true were the results within the study itself to the population in the situation that it was applied to, and then what is the external validity, basically how does it apply to everyday life. And in my experience, both in the academic world, because I spent a lot of time as both a participant and a conductor of research in grad school, and then in the real world as a team sport athlete, as a power lifter, as a coach of team sport athletes and power lifters, I can tell you right now that a lot of research studies, even when done exceptionally well and very tightly controlled, and the conclusions match the results and it's kind of all well done in that sense, a lot of times it just simply doesn't apply to the real world that well. The external validity is not as high as the internal validity. So that's something to remember when you're looking at research. How well does it actually apply to the real world? Another thing to remember is that there are such things as bad studies. There are studies that are poorly designed. Maybe they have really small sample sizes. There aren't that many people in the study. Maybe the duration of the study is too short. Maybe they're looking at a training intervention. They only do it for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, when we know in reality that it takes often a lot longer to make true actual changes to a lifter's abilities, whether it's strength, whether it's hypertrophy, fat loss, whatever. Maybe it's applied to an irrelevant population or a population that you're just not working with. A lot of research studies are done on novices, people who are fairly untrained. And kind of the cliche is that, for somebody who's untrained, anything works, right? They're very malleable. There are a lot of different things that can cause an adaptation. And if you're working with maybe more intermediate or advanced athletes or lifters, there are fewer things that actually work. It's harder to make a true adaptation. So you have to be a little bit careful about copying the interventions that were studied on more novice lifters. Sometimes the conclusions in those studies don't necessarily match the results. If you're just reading abstracts, if you're just reading conclusions, you're missing a lot of the things that might actually be telling the whole story. Because if you look at the methods, how they conducted that study, how tightly was it controlled, Then you look at the actual results, the actual data. Do the methods and the data match the conclusion that the researcher made? And so many times you see methods and data that show one thing, but then the authors of the study then just kind of run onto a conclusion that doesn't match those things. Maybe they're just kind of spouting off what their preconceived notions were in the first place. So you see bias creep in to research studies, and research studies are retracted all the time. If you pay any attention to research journals, very often you see studies get pulled out because in hindsight they found something wrong with it, where they then said, okay, we're going to unpublish this study. We're no longer kind of viewing the results of this study as something worth publishing. So that's just something to remember, that there are such things as bad studies out there. You can't just assume that because something got published that it's gospel. And the last thing to remember is that things that get studied are often conceptualized in the real world first. The training world is kind of the real research lab, where we have the largest kind of pool of things to study and people to study. A lot of times people will say, like, if something worked for one person, it's like n equals 1. Your number of subjects is 1. In the real world, your n is gigantic. Obviously, the controls are not as tight as they would be in a research setting, but you're able to try a lot of different things. And if you're a good coach or a good lifter and you're tracking a lot of things, you're keeping a lot of data, you're keeping a training journal, and you're looking at things like RPE, and you're looking at things like estimated 1 rep maxes, and just like the more stuff that you measure, the more stuff that you can kind of look at and spot trends and say, like, okay, this is working for this lifter, or this is working for kind of like this section of my clientele. Or then you can look at the opposite and you can say, like, okay, like these things are not working. I'm no longer going to do these methods. So coaching and training is one big research study. We're kind of all doing the same sort of thing. We're all trying different things and tinkering with our methods, and we're doing what we think is best in the moment. And sure, you may look at research to kind of fine tune the way that you're doing things, but remember, reading research is hard, and if you haven't been involved with it, it's probably not going to bring a lot of clarity. That's why I think there are a lot of people out there who have their hands in both the academic and the actual real world of strength training that are important to listen to. For example, I really like the Stronger by Science guys. Greg Nuckols and Eric Trexler do a tremendous job of kind of deciphering research and putting it out in a way that's more digestible to kind of the layperson. And they're people who actually have some coaching and lifting experience at a high level, so I value their interpretation of research. They understand both worlds to a great degree. So if you're somebody who's not involved in research and is really just a lifter or just a coach, there are people out there who can help you interpret what's going on in the research world so you can be evidence-based, quote unquote, without kind of just being full of shit. All right, so just be really, really careful of coaches and lifters who claim that they only do things that are evidence-based, that are proven in the research, because research itself has tons of limitations and it doesn't hold a candle to anecdotal evidence, to the principles of strength training. If you're going to lean on anything, don't lean on peer-reviewed research. Lean on the principles, the tried and true principles that are not going to change.